This is an activity about evolution. It's showing how natural selection has worked on peppered moth populations during the Industrial Revolution in order to cause a microevolutionary change. So in this activity, we're going to redefine evolution as the change in allele frequency in a population over time. So previously we were looking just at phenotype, but now we're looking at genotype. And the genes that we're looking at this time are dark-winged moth gene, which is dominant over the light-winged moth gene. So while looking at your handout, okay, see that at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in England, coal burning produced soot that covered the countryside in many areas. So you can see the clouds and smoke there. And then, before the Industrial Revolution, there were populations of peppered moths that lived on the light gray bark of trees. So that's what we're seeing here. We had light gray trees, and there's a light moth, and there's a dark moth. And there were, two types of moth, dark ones and light ones. And the dark gray gene, big G, is dominant over the light gene. And dark moths can be homozygous dominant or heterozygous. And light moths have the homozygous recessive genotype. So let's look here. At what we're talking about. So dark moths can be homozygous dominant, heterozygous, or white moths can be homozygous recessive. So if we're looking just at phenotype, we can count those and determine the percentage. So we have 2 dark moths in this population and 1 light moth. And so the percentages of that, will be 66.6%. And 1/3, is 33.3%. Now, we're looking at evolution as change in allele frequency over time, so we need to count the current frequency of moth alleles. So, how many dark alleles are there? There are 1, 2, 3 dominant dark alleles, and then there are 1, 2, 3 light alleles, little g. So 50% of the alleles are recessive and 50% of the alleles are dominant. So it's important for this activity to be sure that we're not only looking at phenotype, but that we're also looking at genotype. As you continue to read, you can see that light ones blended in with the trees, while most of the dark ones got eaten by birds. However, once the smokestacks started producing a lot of soot, the tree bark became darker and the populations changed. So you have a darker tree bark, and we're going to see how the population changed by doing this activity. All right. So you can see that there are 3 generations of moths, and so you can see the colors of moths, and you can see each of their genotypes in generation 1, 2, and 3. So the first thing you're going to do is collect data from these populations. The first one, you're going to use the diagram to answer the questions, and you will need to use a calculator to determine the percentages. You want to give the number and percentage of the dark and light moths in generation 1. So dark moths, you'll count them out of here, So we have 1 dark moth and 5 light moths. And then you will determine the percentage and put that in the data table there. And now for alleles, since there are 6 moths, and each moth has 2 alleles for the color gene, we're going to have a total of 12 alleles. So dark, big G alleles, there are 1, 2, and right, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 little g's. And then you'll calculate the percent for that. So that's generation 1. And we're going to see if evolution has happened by seeing if the allele frequency has changed. So then you will use the diagram to fill in the data tables for generation 3. Once you have done that, you're going to make a graph of your data. So in this one, right, you're going to draw 2 bar graphs, one showing the change in percent of dark alleles from generation 1 to 3, that's this one, and the other showing the change in percent of alleles, or light alleles, from 1 to 3, and that's right here. So you'll be drawing bar graphs to compare. Then you'll be writing below a caption describing what is happening, what is making this change happen. So what are we seeing and why are we seeing it? A caption is not just a title, so you don't need to just write dark alleles in generations 1 and 3. That's not a caption. That doesn't teach us or tell us or explain anything. So be sure that your captions are explanatory, that they use words like allele frequency and discuss how the environment has changed. And then finally, on the back of here, you will answer the questions from question number 16 on page 281 of your textbook. And those all have to do with their follow-up questions about peppered moth. So those are the instructions for tonight's assignment. Come prepared the next day in class.